We saw a Braita which wanted to show how much God loves Israel. And the proof was that wherever Israel was in exile, God's presence went through the suffering of exile with them. The first example was Egypt. The second example was the second great exile, biblical exile, Bavel. And then from Bavel, it jumps to the future, when they will eventually, Atidin, be redeemed, when they are returned, restored to Israel, Jerusalem, then God's presence will come with them. God will come back with Israel. And until then, stay with us. For the Babylonian rabbis, this is very significant. They say Bavel was an exile, but the real return hasn't happened yet. That means we are now in exile also. And God said that God would be with us as long as we were in exile. So, God's presence must be here now. We can be close to, we can connect with God's presence wherever we are, including here. Which leads to Abaye's question. Well, where in Bavel can you find God's presence? His answer? In the shuls of the big communities. The Beit Knishta, like Beit Knesset, of Hutzal and Harda, of the major Jewish communities. In the places where Jews come together to pray, you will encounter, you can find, you can be connected to God's presence. For the Braita, it was a hardship, but for Abaye, it holds great meaning. If we are still in exile, then God is here. And that means that not having a temple doesn't mean we are alienated from, distant from God. We have ways to connect to God even now. But it also changes something fundamental. Because in temple times, there was only one place to encounter God's presence. You had to go to the Beit HaMikdash, and when you weren't there, you were far. If God's presence is kind of parceled out among the different synagogues, then there are many places where you can encounter God. It's actually much easier. God is much closer. Rabbi Yitzchak follows up. He quotes a verse from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the prophet who lived and wrote in exile, in Bavel. And he quotes God saying, I have exiled them, and I have become for a small sanctuary, a mikdash, ma'at, mikdash like Beit HaMikdash, ma'at, small or many. I have become for them a small sanctuary in the places where they've gone. A small sanctuary. I become a small sanctuary. Well, Rabbi Yitzchak says, what does that mean? Not that God is a small sanctuary, but that in the places where they've gone, especially in Bavel, there will be these mini sanctuaries, these mini temples, and that God's presence will dwell in them just as it dwelled in the original Beit HaMikdash. So the shuls in Bavel are now, and the shuls and the study houses in Bavel are now places where God's presence dwells just as it dwelt in the Beit HaMikdash. And so you can have some element, at least, of the sacred Beit HaMikdash experience and that close encounter in Bavel itself. Our shuls and study houses are those mini temples. That's where you'll find God. And the temple isn't fully gone from our experience. Just because we live in an exile post-temple world, we can still experience part of that temple holiness. Its spirit lives on. And we can do it here in Babylonia. We can connect to the ancient temple in Jerusalem. We can connect to the Jerusalem of the past right here in our homes in Bavel in the present. This changes several things, but critically, it's now a lot less urgent for us to get back to Israel. We're less focused on rebuilding the temple because we have a mini temple experience. And it also changes how I'm supposed to think about my shul or my study house. These are no longer just places where we gather to do stuff. They're now stand-ins for the Beit HaMikdash. They're supposed to feel like the original Beit HaMikdash in some way, to be treated like the Beit HaMikdash. And I'm supposed to be able to go in and have some part of that intense Beit HaMikdash experience in these places. To connect to God's presence in the present, and to connect to the experience of the temple from the past. So that is essentially the challenge that this text presents to us, saying that we lost the temple. We lost this experience of connecting to, being close to God's presence. But the solution for that is not to go back to Israel and rebuild the temple, which is outside of our imagining. We are able to do it, to create that, to build that, to have that experience right here. And we need to focus on building it and establishing it here at home.